Minister, welcome yet again to the morning agenda here on Power 106 FM.
Yes, morning to all of your listeners.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. This report has received so much reaction in the public conversation space. Your basic reaction to start things off to the UN report.
You know why I love the study of the law? Because when you study the law, it gives you an opportunity to understand how to break down issues, identify issues, and know which ones are connected and not connected. What we have done in this case is we have looked at a very important report which relates to Canada and their large assessment of a program which includes not just agricultural workers but an assessment of persons who are incarcerated or were incarcerated. It includes an assessment of persons with disabilities, indigenous people. That assessment from Professor Rapporteur was wide, hundreds of thousands of persons. A small part of it includes agricultural workers, and an even smaller part includes the Jamaican workers. So we have to see how all of these things connect. Now, because a Jamaican worker is said to have described their program with the word slavery, and now Professor Rapporteur, who actually in his title is a special rapporteur on contemporary slavery, because of that connectivity in terms of the word, we have somehow married the two, which I think is unfortunate because it may mislead people to think that this assessment was just about the farm work program, which it is not. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't, however, reduce the importance of us evaluating whether there's any relevance to this assessment to how our farm workers are treated. So I'll go back to the fact-finding mission, which, you know, whenever I hear how it is articulated, we say that the fact-finding mission found that there are no issues. And I don't think that is completely accurate. I think if you were to ask Helene Davis-White and the other members of the fact-finding mission what their opinion is in one sentence, they would say so because more than 80% of who they interacted with had a favorable perspective on the farm working operations. But they themselves, in their mission rather, identified a small percent of 10 or a little bit over 10% who found that there were unfavorable conditions, whether it is poor working conditions or the relationship with the farm manager, or other issues relating to working hours, maybe insufficient working hours, whatever it is. So the reality is that we have about 600 odd farms that now provide employment for Jamaican workers. But there are farms that we have some concerns with, and on those farms, I personally would not define it as slavery-like, because when I look on what the word slavery means to me and to other Jamaicans, you're talking about an involuntary process or something that is such that you are strangled and shackled to stay in it. But I understand what the ultimate, concern is. Do we have conditions that are less than favorable, less than acceptable?
Subhuman.
That are victimizing, that are victimizing our Jamaicans. And the reality is, we ourselves in this fact-finding mission have said, in large part, no. But yes, there are some areas where we have concern. Matter of fact, if you read the report, it goes as far as to identify some geographical areas where we have found that the unfavorability is high. So those are areas where we have to put a focus in, because whether you want to define it as slavery-like or simply as poor working conditions, those areas we find that you have too many farms that we don't define as having acceptable standards. And so for those areas, we have increased the number of liaison officers, we have increased and improved our evaluation and our interrogation of those areas, and we are doing a vigorous assessment to see whether we will continue sending Jamaicans there or if these are things that we can remedy. We have highlighted the fact that we have an annual process of evaluation where Canada and Jamaica and other countries who are part of these programs sit down to look on the conditions of pay, the conditions of work, the conditions of living. We also have to highlight that if any worker feels victimized, they can apply for open work permit, get a transfer, leave if they feel it is to that point. And we accept and understand that because of the importance of getting this money to you and your family, persons may sometimes accept what they ought not to.
Yes.
So we have put in place systems that allow you, if you feel victimized or that you will potentially be victimized, to be able to speak to us anonymously. There's a tip line. There are other ways to speak to your liaison officers. Matter of fact, some farm workers reach out directly to me. Because the reality is, we know that you have persons who have different types of personalities and different perspectives on the same issue. 100 people in the same room, totally different personalities, totally different views. So you may have 10 men or women working on one farm, and you find that 9 say, boy, this place is brilliant, and 1 says, this is hell. Does it mean that it's hell? It means that it's hell to him. So you definitely can't discard his perspective, but you wouldn't want to lump a broad label of that on all persons, because it would be a disservice to the program, where you have so many farm managers and farm workers that have benefited and continue to benefit. So when I look on the report, the first thing is that I assess it objectively. I assess it with the knowledge that the person who is writing it was assigned to examine Canada and their methods or efforts to prevent contemporary slavery. So I know that it is going to be discussing with those words. And I look on how it is aligned in its outcome and its own observations to what we have said. And I don't think, outside of the use of the word, which I don't perhaps agree with, I think that it ratifies what we are saying, that there are issues, there are some areas, though there is a minority of areas, and despite the fact that it is a minority, we should never discard or disregard.
I agree with you, sir, because the true testament of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable. We're on a break here, Minister. I want to pick up on something when we come back. Of course, in August last year, a number of matters were reported, which prompted that fact-finding mission. In the 91-page report released in April, the mission concluded there's no evidence to bear out the claim that the Canadian Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program is akin to systematic slavery. However, that report spoke to 450 out of about 10,000 farm workers in Canada from Jamaica and visited only 10% of farms in the program. How reliable is that report? When we come back with the Honorable Pernell Charles Jr. This is the Morning Agenda. I heard that morning with the Minister promo. Usually it would be Pernell Charles Jr. Of course, he's now Minister of Labour and Social Security, who joins us online. I know, Minister, I know you enjoyed Morning with the Minister, but you have Morning with Morning Agenda now. Welcome back.
I soon start a morning with the Labour Minister.
All right, so no problem. Good. Let's continue because, as I said before the break, the fact-finding mission spoke to 450 out of 10,000 farm workers, visited only 10% of farms in the program. How reliable is that fact-finding mission?
And I really appreciate these questions because they're relevant. And when you look on the methodologies in terms of how our experts have taught us to develop methods that can present outcomes that are reliable. If you assess the methods used by the fact-finding committee in terms of even the numbers, you will see that it is extremely reliable. However, they note that it requires continuous assessment and expanded investigation and observation. So it was never expected that we would be able, in 2 weeks, to assess 600 farms. So they utilized a sample, and it is expected that we would, after utilizing this sample and drawing an outcome, continue our observations, which we have. And those observations are in line with the sample which we have from the observations and investigations from the team that went down. So I would say that we can rely on it. However, we appreciate that there are unique circumstances, and that's why we have our liaison officers there. Remember, we don't just leave our farm workers out there to fend for themselves. We have a complete team that is expected to engage with farm workers, with the owners, and ensure that the conditions of work and living are acceptable.
How many liaison officers we have now, Minister?
They have more than 24, I think it is. I stand corrected, though. But we have increased the numbers. What I can tell you is that when I came in as minister, one of the things I heard is challenges with how the liaison officers are operating and the question as to whether or not they themselves are effective in connecting, communicating, and protecting the rights and interests of the worker. And so we met with all of the liaison officers. We've discussed with the chief liaison officer. They came down to Jamaica, and we reactivated the urgency of the management committee to make sure that there are constant reports, that there is constant engagement. So far, the feedback has been in large part positive, but not all positive. So there is still room for improvement. But we are doing a vigorous assessment to see whether there is need to take any action or whether there's need for further training. And the reality is this will have to be a continuous effort. It can't be a one-off effort because we hear some complaints. There needs to be a continuous monitoring and evaluation of how we are delivering this service. And that is the approach that I am trying to take as minister in terms of raising the level of professional service and the delivery of that service in a timely manner to our farm workers from the start of the process, redefining the orientation program, ensuring that we have a program that once you get a farm work card, even if you are not selected to go on the farm work program, there needs to be somewhere that you can go, be diverted to, that is substantive and constructive. So you will soon hear me come out with a well-crafted policy that will find many different pathways to ensure that anyone that receives a card receives an opportunity. Whether that opportunity is to go to the U.S. or to Canada or maybe to stay in Jamaica but to do something constructive, whether it is agriculture or something else. The goal is to make sure that when it comes down to our labor force, whether here locally or overseas, we have the best potential for persons to be able to maximize their talent and their time.
So the report also, the UN report also highlighted the whole issue of persons being afraid to be whistleblowers. They don't want to lose that employment, so they're afraid to come forward and report. You mentioned a line that persons can call, for example, to be that whistleblower. Is that adequate in terms of getting the information out? You have the liaison officers and you have that line. Is that adequate?
It may be adequate to some, but the reality is what you really have to have is a culture created, an environment where people are confident that they can speak out once it is respectful and once it is justified, and not be victimized. Now, I can't tell you that is going to change in 1 year or 1 month, but what I can tell you is based on our observations, more than 80% of the persons who are interacting with the program believe that they can speak out. They don't believe that they're victimized. They believe that the program is going well. But for that smaller percent, which do believe that there are issues, it is clear that some of them feel that they will be victimized if they say anything. And so what we have done is said to that group, listen, we may not be able to give you 100% foolproof mechanism, but here are the things that we're going to do. We're going to remind you that you have rights, and that if it is that you feel victimized to a level, you can apply for an open work permit, come after that farm and go to another farm so you don't lose your work. Secondly, if it is at a level where you want to walk, you're free to walk. If you come back to Jamaica, we will work with you to see how we can get you transferred. Once there's no issue with any action or conduct from your perspective, then we will work with you to get you to another place where you can be able to take care of your family still. Thirdly, we put in place, lines and email and other things, and they're open there for you to utilize. Fourthly, you have the liaison officers that you can work with. You have the Canadian officials that you can work with in terms of report. And I dare say another important thing is to know your own rights personally. And so we even provide pamphlets. I wouldn't go as far as to say comprehensive training, but we have an orientation program that reminds them of all of these things and what they can do, what their rights are, and what their responsibilities are.
Because there are a number of workers that felt victimized because they feel as if they had protested last, was it July or August, regarding the wastewater in their living facilities. And here it is that trade unionist Vincent Morrison is trying to hold you to account that, listen, it cannot be that these persons are sent back to Jamaica based on protesting about unsanitary conditions. Will that be a matter that you will continue to pick up to essentially try and find, as the trade unionist says, justice for these persons that were deported?
Let me say this, and I know that many people may not like to hear these things. When I say it, the reality is there's always 2 or 3 versions to a story. And I'm a Jamaican. I understand our people. I understand that when somebody perhaps doesn't receive the favor that they think they deserve, things will be said. So I do not just listen to what somebody is saying. I investigate. I engage all different parties. And there are circumstances, Jesse, where some of our workers, I'll be blunt with you, will say that they are victimized and that's why they were sent home. And when we check it out, there is justification for why they were not returned to the farm. However, there are times when you can say to yourself, yes, this might well be victimization. So what do? We have a program that says, listen, for instance, in that last case that you have referred to, those workers were, in their view, prematurely sent home by the employer.
Yes.
When we checked it, we didn't see on their file any complaint filed from the employer. We didn't see any reports of a breach of contract filed by the employer. And so our approach is that those workers are going to be returned or transferred to other farms. Now, if we saw a report of breach of contract and complaints from the employer, and when we investigate it, we see that it's true, not just because it's a Jamaican farm worker mean that we're going to turn a blind eye to that. No. In those cases, then the person would have been justifiably sent home. And other farms would not want somebody who is causing disruption, which is not justified.
According to Morrison, the contracts weren't completed, but they said they didn't have any work.
No, but that is not unusual, and I don't want to speak to what Mr. Morrison is saying because I don't know what it is that he is evaluating. But I can tell you in general, if you go up on farm work on Jesse Blake Farm, and your contract says you're going to stay for 6 months to do X, but the weather conditions or some other intervening factor causes you to not be able to work more than 3 months, you're going to be sent home after the 3 months, and you'll be returned back to you'll be called back to the farm when conditions become favorable. That's not unusual. It happens. Matter of fact, when these 5 gentlemen were sent home, you had another 40 or 50 that were also sent home from other farms for conditions that were similar in terms of weather conditions and other complaints. So it's not unusual. What we have to do is make sure that you don't have farm owners or employers that are using those reasons to victimize somebody, right? So you don't want a scenario where somebody will say, I really want to get rid of you because you're the one talking out loud, but I'm going to tell them that it's the weather why you have to go home. And when I assessed it myself, and looked on who would have been involved in these situations, majority of the persons who were outspoken are still at the farm right now working. So in my mind, it really never made 100% sense for me to draw the conclusion that the reason why men would have been sent home is because of their presence or prominence in that incident. Because the ones, based on what I was told by these workers who were present and prominent, are still in Canada working. You get what I'm saying?
Got you.
So I don't want to focus in on that only. The reality is that many times our workers will say things that may not be completely aligned to reality. And many times the farm owners, employers, will try to victimize workers and gouging it or under the veil of some other reason. The reality is we have to assess it, investigate it, and make sure that we use our sensibility to ensure the rights and interests of our workers, and also respect for the farmers as well is made prominent.
Now, you mentioned that you have an upcoming meeting, a regional meeting with the Canadians. When exactly is that?
I believe that I have a stakeholder engagement in October, and then I have the annual meeting should be in Trinidad and Tobago, I'm told, and I believe it is in November.
Okay.
And that is where we will meet to discuss all of the details, terms and conditions of the next year's program.
I understand it's a yearly meeting, Minister?
Yes, yearly meeting.
Why should Jamaicans feel confident that the conditions and reports coming out from Jamaicans in Canada in relation to the conditions that they're facing, why should they be confident that it will be addressed this time around? Of course, even when we've had reports last year of the same nature. Why should they feel confident that things will change?
The structure of the question would give the listener the impression that it wasn't addressed before. And that's where we disagree. I mean, I don't think that it is, uncommon or unexpected that you would find that a percentage of persons have an unfavorable view. If you have 600 different farms, all of them won't be perfect, all of them won't be at the standard that you like. What you have to do is make sure that the ones that are not at that standard, you're keying down on them, and you ensure that your farm workers either don't go there, or if they go there, adjustments are made. And what we have seen in the last year is that some of these conditions continue, so there is need for improvement, but in large part, we've identified issues, and those issues have been adjusted favorably. Now, does it mean that it is a perfect situation? No. That's why we have a liaison service. That's why you have police officers in our society, because it is never going to be perfect. We have to have consistent evaluation, consistent interrogation of the system to make sure that it continues to be at the standard, or if it is not at the standard, it is moved up to the standard where we feel it's okay to send our brothers, our fathers, our mothers, our sisters to this place. Remember, this is a program that is 57 years old. You have almost 9,000 Jamaicans in Canada yearly.
Yes.
85% of those who go up are returned. And you have people you have generational farm workers. So this is a program that is very important. It has done, in large part, it has provided positive contribution to our economy, positive contribution to the Canadian economy, sent many children to school, built many homes, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. And so we focus down on those issues that need to be fixed. That's what we're going to be discussing at the annual meeting. That's what I will continue to discuss with my liaison officers. And I hope any farm worker listening to me will understand that my words we're not suggesting things are perfect. What we're suggesting is that your minister wants to be there to protect your rights and interests. So we're providing you with as many tools as possible to make sure that you can speak freely, you can speak anonymously, and you can speak boldly so that we can get the ammunition to do our work to help you.
Minister Pernell Charles Jr., thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Jesse.
All the best. Take care. The Honorable Pernell Charles Jr., Minister of Labour and Social Security.